Welcome to the Arctic Amazon Knowledge Exchange workshop on land relations hosted by the Wapatah Center for Indigenous Visual Knowledge. My name is Gerald McMaster. I am Nehio Plains Cree and a citizen of the Siksika Nation of Alberta. Today, Nina Vincent, the co-curator, and I are joined by Harald Gaski, a groundbreaking Sámi voice in Norway and the circumpolar Arctic. As well, he is a contributing author to our forthcoming Arctic Amazon publication. So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that this workshop is hosted by and with the generous support of OCAD University, Ryerson University, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Connections Grant. We're also grateful to our amazing supporters, including the Appleton Foundation, Nancy McCain and Bill Morneau, Michael O'Dane, and Kiki Delaney. We would also like to thank our partners at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, Gaetan Verna, Noor Ale, and Adelina Vlas for their continued passion about this project. So now I'm going to introduce and invite Adelina Vlas, who is the head of exhibitions and publications at the Power Plant Gallery, to say a few words about the upcoming Arctic Amazon exhibition this coming September 2022. Adelina?
Thank you, Gerald. Bonjour, hello, bonjour. It is an honor to be here today and represent the Power Plant team and to talk about the exhibition Arctic Amazon, a project that is very close to our hearts. The exhibition has been developed in close collaboration with the Wapatah team and will be on view at the Power Plant this fall from the end of September through December. Arctic Amazon, the exhibition, will take over the entire building and will present contemporary Indigenous and Inuit artists from both regions in order to challenge common sense outsiders' views about those territories and the people living in them. Departing from Indigenous ontologies and knowledge, the artists show their concerns with the land and entangled relations with ancestors, all living beings that surround them, and changes that occurred since colonization. They address Indigenous knowledge, spiritual practices, violence, and ecological concerns, working in various medias and levels of discourse to present realities of great diversities and nature shaped by human and non-human beings, connected and in relation, that are threatened and need to be protected by those who are inherently part of it. The Power Plant is honored to be part of this timely project, and we look forward to its complex manifestations later this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Adelina. Now, Harald Gaski is a professor in Sámi culture and literature at the Sámi University of Applied Sciences and at the Arctic University of Norway. He was born in Diatno Tana in northern part of Norway. Professor Gaski is an author and editor of several books on Sámi literature and culture. He has also translated Sámi literature and Nils-Aslak Valkeapea's poetry into Norwegian and English. His research specializes in Indigenous methodologies and Sámi oral and written culture. Professor Gaski has been instrumental in establishing Sámi literature as an academic field, and he has been awarded many times for his research and writing. So welcome, Harald, if I may.
Thank you.
So Harald, it's a real pleasure to have you here and to have your contributions to the Arctic Amazon exhibition, as Adelina just pointed out. From your long history, you bring a great deal to our understanding of art from Northern Europe. But from our point of view up here in North America, you might be seen as a part of Western art history, which I know you're not, because the people of Sámi, like other Indigenous peoples in the circumpolar regions, have chosen to live at the so-called margins. As I understand it, the Sámi have always been treated in your homeland as other, particularly, as I say, in the Scandinavian countries and in northern part of Russia. So this condition of otherness has enabled artists and scholars such as yourself to reimagine Sámi art, history, and culture. So as a scholar, what are some of the profound changes that have happened over, let's say, the last 30 to 50 years in Indigenous or Sámi art studies in Northern Europe?
Yes, that's a huge one to reply to, but I would say a greater awareness to Sámi arts in general, Sámi scholarship, and also a more serious listening to what the Sámi scholars, Sámi artists are saying ourselves. With that I mean there has been a shift from the outside people explaining what the Sámi think, what the Sámi say, what in a way having this mediator position where they explain and the Sámi just are informants. So I would say this the whole idea of sovereignty and self-determination and having our own views and letting our own voices be heard probably is the biggest change in that sense. And also the turn from this ethnographic anthropological art historian and historian in general perspective of explaining the Sámi, so that we have entered the stage ourselves, and it's now more on our own perspective, and from our own perspectives that things are explained and interpreted. No.
Sorry, I was on mute. I just wanted to extend that the conversation. If you would like to address this idea of Sámi art studies or Indigenous art studies, which has become quite important, or even in your own work as far as Sámi literature.
It is an interesting field, and academics are really fast to realize what is interesting in the international academic field as well. So in a way, what we've also experienced is this entrepreneurship in a way coming into academia, that when they see there is a huge or growing interest for this field, which for a while was left more or less to the indigenous peoples themselves. We like in North America, you created the native studies departments, native studies units, and so on and so on, and we did the same in Scandinavia or in the Nordic countries with the Sámi centers and so on. And the idea was in a way that the indigenous peoples ourselves then should be the ones doing the exercise, doing the scholarship and research. But when the field started to grow and create more interest, then you also get the non-indigenous people entering the field again. So that and that's of course that creates a competitive situation, and you can say that that's probably also a part of the struggle we've had within academia for from the late 60s onwards, when the indigenous perspective got into scholarship more generally and more as a strong indigenous voice, because it has been a struggle to be able and get the license more or less to speak on our own and to really represent ourselves in that sense. so yes, within my background is literary studies, comparative literature, and I found that a very interesting approach also to art history, which I haven't really done that much into so far, but you know, with this holistic approach that we claim to have within indigenous scholarship, we don't really compartmentalize academia in the same way as it has been done in the Western universities. So therefore I found the way I interpret literary texts as a very productive way to also approach visual arts and music, because one of the fields I've been doing quite a lot of research within is yoik, the Sámi vocal genre, and there's a very strong connection between traditional Sámi poetry and the yoik lyrics. So, well, now I'm really getting away from your question, but at least.
I think we'll return to perhaps some of those questions a bit later, but like me, Harald, in my life, there's key people or role models that have come into our lives, and I'm assuming that the same with you. They kind of influence us in some way or another, and I'm thinking that the people that we run into in our lives kind of set us on our path, our road, or our highways, for example. And I'm assuming the same is for you. So would there be any person or persons who might have influenced your life?
Yes, definitely. I actually would start with my mother, because she was really clever at using Sámi proverbs, adage in the upbringing. So and I obviously was a child who asked a lot of questions. So when she got tired of all my questions, she replied with a proverb, which then, by per definition, is expressed in a different way than the everyday speak. So then I immediately understood, well, here, this is end of communication for that matter. So, but later I really realized that her use of proverbs really was one of my sources of inspiration for choosing literature as my field of study. The other one was my uncle, who I realized really Nils-Aslak Valkeapää, this great Sámi poet and multimedia artist, whom I'm coming to. But he reminded me of my uncle and my uncle's philosophical conversations that we had, because my uncle was also very instrumental in making me believe in Sámi traditions and Sámi language, and teaching me that they are of value. I'm speaking of my uncle because my father died when I was really young, very young, and then according to Sámi traditions, his older brother then had the responsibility of teaching me the traditional livelihoods and also teach me the theoretical knowledge, more or less. So when I then got to meet Nils-Aslak and became a friend with him, and I also started to collaborate with him, I was brought back in time to a lot of the conversations I had with my uncle, because Nils-Aslak was very philosophical in his in everything he did, and he was also very occupied with Sámi traditions. So in a way, how to use traditions in order to create something new. So you know, this combination of tradition and innovation. So I found lots of things that in our collaboration, in our discussions, that reminded me of what I had from my childhood. and my childhood was quite traditional, because I always say I'm so lucky I was born in the mid-50s, and which meant that we hadn't been introduced to the television yet, so oral culture and storytelling was still alive, and also and it really was something that people didn't need to tell stories, but it always, and every evening there was storytelling going on. So in a way, those stories really got to me in that way. But then I also, because I was born in the 10 years after the Second World War had ended, that created some new possibilities for me to go to schools and continue all the way to university. So which my siblings didn't have, because they are several years older than I am. So I was fortunate in that sense, I think.
Harald.
I was just going to say, your childhood almost mirrors mine, as the kind of things you were saying. Anyhow, Nina, would you like to ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, because you mentioned Nils-Aslak's idea for a book on the concept of the Arctic Highway on a prior conversation. So I assume it follows the developing discourse of the circumpolar Arctic. Can you help us understand the circumpolar Arctic from a Sámi perspective?
Yes, that was an idea Nils-Aslak got, or he had that idea for a long time, but towards the end of his life, well, he didn't of course know that it was towards the end of his life, but at least after having produced 3 very important books, Trekways of the Wind, The Sun, My Father, and The Earth, My Mother, he wanted to continue with more kind of an essay book, which then would in a way also complete the circle, because his first book was a collection of essays, and then he was thinking of having this essay book as his final one. But that idea developed more and more, and in a way also became like 2 ideas, where one was this Arctic Highway, which in his thinking reflects the idea that the Arctic people, the circumpolar people, have always been in contact with each other, and has shared ideas, and also been inspired by each other. So and there are proofs of contact, like a ski from the easternmost part of Siberia was found in the land where east part of what now is Finland, or the land between on the borderland between Finland and Russia, and that ski obviously then had moved all the way to the west, and in Nils-Aslak's thinking, he used petroglyphs, stone art, which he also found resembled each other, both in Alaska and closer to where you are in Peterborough in Canada, and the huge fields we find in the Alta region in Finnmark, in the northernmost part of Norway. So so that was one thing he thought as a proof of this contact. And maybe the most important thing for him was the way livelihoods and reindeer and herding connects the people as well. So this and the way it had affected and impacted the thinking and philosophy of the people. So it was really unfortunate that he didn't get any further with that idea, but the term the Arctic Highway for thinking and sharing of ideas really is something that I think still will be inspiring people for quite some time into the future as well.
Harald, in the late gosh, in the last 20, 30 years, the late 20th century and this early part of this century up until today, there's been this shift away from this dominant Western perspective to one which you and I may think about or call an indigenous ways of knowing and being. And I think the shift in perspective has been quite influential to indigenous folks around the world. And that's why we're talking about it through the Arctic Amazon project. So can you speak from your experience of this turn to an indigenous methodology, which you were talking about earlier?
Yes, definitely, and because I can actually use myself as a as an example in that connection, because I was brought up, like I said, in a traditional, more or less traditional Sámi way, learning the Sámi values, and then going to a really Norwegian school where none of the Sámi values were reflected in any way. There was almost nothing about the Sámi in the textbooks and so on. And the same just got repeated through high school and all the way up to the university. So when I wanted to study comparative literature, that was then comparative European literature, definitely. And when I was going to write my dissertation, I wanted to focus on Sámi literature, which of course was all right for my advisor, but on the other hand, there were limitations to how much I could use Sámi experiences and Sámi ways of explaining things. So this it was not a they didn't reject me to do that, but it was so new and unfamiliar to them. So again, it was this struggle to explain why it is important, why it is relevant, and why it also may bring something new into research. So so actually, when I've been thinking back to what I did then in the 80s, I feel that I was already at that time practicing indigenous methodologies, although the term came much later. But really, that was what I was taught by my Sámi teacher, that when I studied Sámi language at the University of Tromsø at that time, which I also neither had an opportunity to do in school before. So my first possibility and option to study Sámi as a language was at the university. And my university teacher was a very clever man. So he inspired me to really continue to do studies within literature and also then use Sámi perspectives and Sámi interpretation in that field. So and then it was inspiring for me because I started, since I in a way was establishing Sámi literature as an academic field, I felt it very natural to do comparisons to other indigenous peoples. And the closest one then was North America, both Canada and the US. And especially in the US in the late 70s, early 80s, there were quite a lot of discussion going on within the field of literature. So that was inspiring for me to see that the same things were being discussed there. And then, then at the end of, towards the end of the 90s, of course, this indigenous methodology was coined as a new term and making it into an even more global thing and movement. So what started in the late 60s as a political movement of the indigenous peoples collaborating first through the World Council of Indigenous Peoples and other bodies like that, also brought the cultural movement, made it, gave a good start to that, and also then within academia. So simultaneously we had the same kind of movement through all the indigenous communities and societies, I feel.
Nina, would you like to ask a question?
Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, I wanted to get back to one of the recurring themes that comes all the time in this Arctic Amazon project that we've been discussing a lot with all the contributing artists and authors. We are always talking about land relations. So Harald, in your work and writing, what role does the land and the rivers and the sun play? How do they shape this, the value systems represented in Sámi livelihoods? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yes, that's one of my favorite topics actually. So
Great.
so definitely you just tell me to stop when I've been speaking for too long. No, because
Go ahead, please.
the sun, of course, is like I mentioned, Nils-Aslak Valkeapää's books. One of them, the one that he was awarded the Nordic Council's Literature Prize for, was exactly the sun my father gave, and the other one, the follow-up, was And the Earth My Mother. And the sun was a Sámi, like a lot of other indigenous peoples and other peoples too, trace our ancestry all the way back to the sun. So, and there is a myth explaining why that relationship is. The myth is too long to get into here, but anyway, part of the myth is that the great creator, who sometimes seems to be the sun and other times, well, it's not defined in that sense, but when the great creator created the Sámi, he or she knew about the hardships the people would meet. So in order to give the people something to believe in, a solace in a way, he or she then put a living and beating heart of a 2-year-old reindeer cow, of a Aldo, which is more or less a mythic reindeer in Sámi thinking and Sámi methodology. So that heart was put in the middle of the earth. So the people, every time they were losing heart, they were losing or afraid of the future, they could just lay their ear down to the ground and listen for the heartbeats from below. And if the heart was still beating, then that was a guarantee that there would be a future for the Sámi. But of course, that being a myth, I don't think any Sámi really have dared to test it if they actually hear the heart still beating. But anyway, that heart then makes a connection between the earth and the Sámi. So definitely that also has the heartbeat of the mother then represented in that part, and then the sun being the father figure. So the connection between the two powers is then emphasized in that myth. And the Sámi have always then understood our position in the world to be the ones to keep up that connection. And I actually think that has, even though no one has expressed that, but I think that connection and that responsibility has been one of the reasons for the Sámi being so stubborn that we haven't accepted to become assimilated, even though we have the majority population around us all the time. So it's really been a fight and a struggle to survive, and not least to keep our language alive. So there we see the mythical background for it, and then also I was mentioning language, and language definitely is a great reservoir for traditional knowledge and the values that have been important for the Sámi. So since we've lost a lot of the other ceremonies we probably, or most probably, have had because of really this hard colonization and assimilation politics that was conducted against us, then language has become even more important, language and the Yoikan. So, and that connects us to land, because Sámi language is spoken here where we live, because the Sámi are here, but also because the land in a way chose us. And that was a point for Nils-Aslak as well, that it wasn't the Sámi who chose to live here, but it was the land and the birds and animals, the reindeer, who chose that the Sámi should be their co-inhabitants in this region. So, and I like that way of turning the tables, that it's not the people who decide every time that we're going to, this is a place for us to live, but it's actually the environment that decides you are the best qualified ones to be our co-inhabitants in this region.
I really like the stories, and I think we could probably share a lot of these stories, and certainly the communities across North America about the sun and the sun and all kinds of figures that appear in mythology and that. But you also mentioned about this question of the land and putting your ear to the ground and hearing the heartbeat. In our language, the Plains Cree language, Nehiao, and there's a word for fire. We say iskuteo, and the translation of iskuteo, or fire, means woman's heart. So it comes so close to what you're saying. It's like the heartbeat that comes, the fire from the earth is really the fire of the woman. And I really like that. It's very, very poetic. And if we do these kinds of analysis of language, we find out how extremely poetic language can be. And I'm kind of interested in that, like you are, because language does come from the earth. You know, for indigenous languages do spring from the earth. And the sad thing about all this and about language and the reclamation of indigenous languages is that, you know, our history, particularly governments who sent forcibly a lot of our children to residential schools where they were forced to speak colonial languages. And we start to see the world through these colonial languages, and our perspectives are altered considerably. So would you like to talk a bit more about this reclamation of the Sámi language, for example, and the poetics behind the indigenous language that is Sámi, for example?
Yes, I very often refer to Nils-Aslak, but I'll do it again because he said once about Sámi language, or he said it several times, that Sámi language actually is made for poetry, and it is poetry by listening to it. So, and I think that's actually sharing the same points of views that you were expressing now. So, and I think for the Sámi, language really has been so instrumental in understanding the environment that it wouldn't be possible to keep up the culture the way it has been kept up until now, because of course everything is changing very rapidly now, even also Sámi culture and the views and the what is Sámi culture and what should be in what way it should develop and so on. But if you look at traditions and traditional uses of language, I see the background picture now is the taken in trees that are really showing that it's 40 below outside, and concerning snow terms, the Sámi is probably the language in the world that has most terms for different snow conditions, more than 300 different terms for that. And actually there are linguists who contest that and say that's not true, but it is true, and it definitely reflects the importance of knowing snow conditions in the traditional livelihood. So you needed to know what kind of snow it was if a wolf or a wolverine could be easily attacking the reindeer, because the reindeer has been important for the Sámi all through history, even though less than 10% of the Sámi population nowadays is connected with reindeer herding. But the wild reindeer, Goddi, was one of the main incomes or main resources for food for Sámi in the old society. So really the language developed through describing and understanding the environment, understanding land, and also then sharing the values with the other animals and birds and so on. So there are several Sámi stories that start in the way they saying that when we still could speak with the animals. And of course, most probably they didn't share a common language, but at least that it's saying that they still could understand each other and communicate in that sense. So, and I guess that's really one of the main reasons for us moving away from nature, that we've forgotten that communication with our co-inhabitants. So we don't really understand the animals and the birds anymore. They still continue to speak to us, but the Western mind doesn't have time to listen to them. So that's also one of the responsibilities I feel for the indigenous cultures and us indigenous scholars as well, to speak of these issues and emphasize them, even though we very often then are criticized for being romantic and speaking of old values and trying to look back instead of looking forward. But you know, even in hermeneutics, Gadamer and Heidegger said that you need to look back in order to find your way forward, and that's also very clearly expressed in Sámi thinking, that if you when you're moving in nature, the high plateaus and so on, you need to look back in order to find your way forward. But also meaning that you need to be back, look back, so you recognize the land you've been moving through. And recognizing the land then doesn't mean only that you can track your way back home, but that you also will understand the land you are passing through.
I think when we read about the Canadian Arctic, in particular the Inuit, and we were working with a number of Inuit in this exhibition, and you obviously share the environment of the circumpolar. We often hear Inuit have a great number of words for snow. And as you say, you need to know the qualities of the environment in which you live. And that's how language is. That language really helps us conceptualize our environment, our world around, and how to describe it. And so if snow is the driving factor for life in the Arctic, we can begin to see why. And I think you're just articulating the reason why. I come from a land of a flat land that's always windy. So similarly, our language is filled with terms and adjectives to describe wind. So I can see exactly what you're saying. Harald, I'd like to now see if we can switch you over to talk a little bit about the field of art, visual art, in which we at Wapatah, we refer to it as Indigenous Visual Knowledge. And in this exhibition that we've described, the Arctic Amazon exhibition, we're very excited to showcase artists from the circumpolar Arctic regions and with artists from the Amazon. And one idea that has been critical to resistance to Western influence is this idea, you spoke earlier, and I'd like you to talk a bit more about it, this idea of traditional knowledge. And Indigenous visual knowledge is an articulation of this idea. So if you can talk a bit more about what some have used the abbreviation TK or ITK, traditional knowledge or Indigenous traditional knowledge. Could you talk a bit more about that in relation to the art, for example?
Yeah, that's really it's very obvious, and it is remarkable also in that sense that a lot of indigenous artists go back when they are choosing topics that they that they want to specialize in and do artwork within. So and I think they do that not only in respect for the past and for traditional values, but it's also a way for them to situate themselves in today's world, respecting and learning from traditions that we need as indigenous peoples, since also the political definitions of indigenous peoples in a way tie us to the land and also traditional values in that sense. So partly because of that, but mainly I think because tradition has so much to teach us nowadays, still nowadays, and since a lot of the artists older than 40 or 50 years, they didn't get that teaching in school. So although they had learned things at home, those things weren't reflected in the school system. So when they, as artists, want to express themselves, it is important for them to know their background and express their background as well in the contemporary art they produce. So and I feel that's it's not only within arts, and I like that visual knowledge expression for arts, because that's also one of the problems, of course, within this field, that we like to choose our own terms, and those are the most exact ones, but on the other hand they need to be translated or explained in the majority languages. So we need to do that work as mediators, but on the other hand, the preciseness that we find in our own cultures is hard to express in the majority languages and majority cultures. And by the way we at least were taught in school was we always heard Sámi is lacking an equivalent expression to this and that Norwegian expression, and of course it was the other way around. The English and Norwegian didn't fit into this environment where the Sámi live. But those things have changed and are changing. So I I definitely feel that tradition for indigenous arts and scholarship and even politics is really much more emphasized and appraised than it is within Western societies. And I guess that's partly also because we didn't really have that division between nature and culture. So everything was natural in the sense that it belonged to nature, and culture isn't really something that is better or more advanced than nature. So and I think that's where the Western societies actually went wrong and chose the wrong path, trying to make that difference between culture and nature, and then also by definition leaving the nature people behind, so, and stigmatizing that those values that the indigenous peoples represent, they are of less importance compared to the higher level of thinking that the culture represents. I don't know if this was an answer to your question, but at least again, being in academia, we so often have to express these things in a way that even tradition gets stigmatized, that we are very often criticized for being too much occupied with traditions and traditional values and not looking enough into the future. But I guess our voices are even more and more needed to remind about what tradition and what the traditional wisdom says about how we have survived so far, and maybe there's still time to learn from indigenous peoples to make us survive even longer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the art field is a really interesting place to escape some of the traps that the academic world poses to reflect and to express indigenous traditions sometimes, right? I feel I see in the Amazonian, and I'm from Brazil, so I was more acquainted with the Amazonian indigenous arts, but I got lucky enough to get involved in this Arctic Amazon project and to get to know some of the Inuit and Sámi and other artists from the Arctic. And I see some similarities in this approach, in this using the art for exploring, getting to know their own history, their own traditions. So there's one artist that we are going to show in this. There's one artist that has been showing her work in many exhibitions, was in the 2018 Documenta, that is Britta Marakatt-Labba. And we wonder if you could comment on her magnificently stitched history of the Sámi people work. We tried to get her work for this exhibition, but we've been told that it is now in some important institution. But we were wondering if you could speak of this work in terms of this cultural tradition as it is reflected in language and in art. I think we have an image of this work, yeah.
Yes, it's really a magnificent
It's
work.
really amazing, right?
Yes, 24-meter long frieze, and so it is definitely a stitched history of the Sámi, and you're right. I also have been thinking about that. What I think a lot of the people. A lot of the artists we have, the fabulous artists, they could have been professors at universities if they wanted to. But I think the freedom that the art field represents compared to the more rigid rules of the academy is one of the reasons that a lot of the talented people go into arts, and because we have, compared to how many we are, we really do have a lot of really great artists, and Britta, of course, is one of those, and she this piece is wonderful in many ways. She has it is 24-meter long, and she has details when it comes to describing reindeer and movement and the way the sleds are packed and so on, that really is definitely impressive, that you can stitch that and show that so clearly in embroidery as well, embroidery on textile. So and what she does is she goes also all the way back to the myths. So you get this big cosmic hunt, which is another of the Sámi mythical stories, that those son of the suns, they were great moose hunters and also the inventors of skis. So the ski is a Sámi invention; it's not a Norwegian invention, as we were taught in school. But so when they died, they weren't buried in the traditional way, but they were lifted up to heaven to become Gallabadnit, the three stars of Orion's belt. Orion's belt, of course, shows back to Greek mythology, while Gallabernit then shows to Sámi history and Sámi myths. So and Britta gets that into the story. So it doesn't start with a myth, but the myth is told there in that history lecture or lesson she has, and then also the uprising in Guadagain or Kautokeino, where the Sámi revolted against the long time suppression of the minister and merchant, and they were really utilized and badly treated. So they finally revolted against that, and it became even 2 people were killed. So that's also represented in the history, in the story she tells. But the main part still is about Sámi livelihoods and representing a wide field of agriculture and reindeer herding, fisheries, and all the traditional livelihoods that the Sámi have been involved in. So and then creating parts of the embroidery as reminding of the Sámi Nuedi drum, the shaman's drum, and placing values in there. So the value system of the Sámi is also expressed in that story. So it is definitely a Sámi history expressed in embroidery, and it has parallels in the yoik, where we have yoik narratives, the Sámi vocal genre, which is so important has been so important for the Sámi and also Sámi identity. So we have yoik narratives that also express Sámi history in an oral way. So we have histories expressed from our own perspectives, but not as written histories for within the study field of history. Well, we do have that as well, but these are much more interesting in the way that they also are there for us to interpret and see different values in that specific piece of art.
I was very, very impressed by this piece because I saw it in 2018 in Germany during the exhibition of Documenta, and it was just a phenomenal piece. As Nina said, we did try to get it. Unfortunately, it's now, I think, it's a heritage piece, and it's just very difficult to have it travel. So we understood that. Another artist that I saw at Documenta back in 2018 was Maret Ann-Sara, the Norwegian artist, and who addresses reindeer issues. Her family is very much involved in the reindeer issues, and her art just is filled with the question of the reindeer. And she makes reference to even my people on the prairies who were bison hunters in the 19th century. So there was this kind of interesting connections that she drew. Another artist that's in the exhibition, the Arctic Amazon exhibition, who we're bringing this fall is Outi, the Finlandic Sámi artist. And she also addresses traditional ideas. And I'm hoping you might talk about this new generation. You know, you talked about the under 40 who are beginning to see the world quite differently than those a bit older like us, and where they express this traditional knowledge as I would say, a kind of a sovereign act of selfhood. And I'm wondering if this is the last question, unfortunately, because we are running out of time, and I know you have lots to do and it's very late there, but I hope you can answer the one last question that I have. So could you talk about this new, using the tradition in new ways with, and I see that Brittany has put up a couple images of the work by these artists.
Yes, that Outi is remarkable also in the way that she has collaborated with Eva Kristine Nylander, who formerly was Eva Kristine Harlin, and which is quite typical for a lot of the newer generation, or the new generation of Sami artists, that they are actually researchers simultaneously as well. Their art is based on research they've done in archives and speaking to people, learning traditions, and like for Outi, this specific piece of the horned hat, she uses that as a piece also of remateriation. We are getting back issues and things that have been taken away from us and placed in majority museums, and they are being returned, or at least we want them to be returned, and there is also an agreement that several of them will be returned to Sami museums. But so which then will represent a new source of inspiration for a lot of artists, I'm sure. But like for Outi, this has been a project of learning from tradition, and through her artwork commenting on history and the way that this Lachogohpir, this horned hat, was banned by missionaries and colonialists. So because it didn't fit into their view of aesthetics, and it also, the missionaries saw it as something belonging to the devil, that horn and the specific shape of the hat in a way frustrated them and made them make their own strange stories why that hat was sinful. So it was banned and more or less actually went out of use. But then Outi has gone back to the sources and found information out what it looked like, and also recreated it. So in a way, this is the rejection, or that the people shouldn't be allowed to use it, was in a way also parallel to the forced transformation of Sami societies that we experience through the assimilation politics and so on, that the Sami should actually forget all about our traditional values and stop being Sami and then be assimilated. So but now things have changed, and the table has turned. So what Outi does through her artwork is also to show this new pride in our traditions and in our cultural heritage. So getting this hat into use again is a kind of oppositional work, but also a way of paying respect to old traditions, and especially the female part of that. So this is also a decolonial feminist project from her point of view.
Now there's another work that I think, Brittany, maybe you can show us, which is kind of based on the Sami shawl, the women's shawl, which again is along similar lines. Would you like to talk about this and where this might have come from? So I believe it's from the shawl kind of designs that the women wear.
Yes, exactly. It is a shawl, but of course this is new material and different materials. So again, this is her way of using traditions and transforming it into a new reality. So and then in a way showing through her artwork the way tradition and innovation should walk hand in hand when we are shaping the indigenous future. So combining duetji, which is the traditional Sámi crafts, or actually, what does she say about it? It's a collective way of making, and which is a very nice way of putting it, because duetji is in a way a collective way of understanding our place in this world. So it's also reflecting Sámi thinking and Sámi philosophy. So and Gakti, the Sámi outfit, which also traditionally was like the language, it had different dialects, so you could see from what kind of Gakti people were wearing, where they came from, and what Sámi people they belonged to. So using all these ornamental things in contemporary artwork is simultaneously paying respect to traditions, but also really being innovative new art, which then can compete with whatever art you'll bring on the stage from whoever artist.
Yeah, they have been getting a lot of, she's been getting a lot of invitations. A few years ago, she was in the Gwangju Biennale, and this coming next month, I believe, it opens the Sydney Biennale in Sydney, Australia, in which this piece actually is being shown. And following the Biennale in Sydney, it will come here to Toronto to the power plant. So we're quite excited. I think there are about 3 different pieces as part of this installation. Another artist who's getting a lot of, which I talked about earlier, Maret Ann-Sara, is getting a lot of recognition this coming spring. She, and along with 2 other Sámi artists, are going to be presented in the Scandinavian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. So we're quite excited about, of course, her presentation, but she has been very much engaged in the reindeer and the issues around the reindeer and its impact of not only in Sámi contemporaneity, but the history and the relationship between the governments of Sweden, Finland, and Norway, and just how there's this kind of the tension that's created between Sámi and these colonial governments. Brittany, perhaps you can take us to the next image of Maret with the skull, the hanging skulls. So Harald, if you want to address a little bit about these kind of issues that Maret has chosen to really voice on behalf of Sámi.
Yes, that specific story behind her concentration on the reindeer issues, of course, had to do with the situation of her brother when the authorities decided that he had to reduce his reindeer herd to such a small number of reindeer that it wouldn't be enough to really make a livelihood out of that. And the issue was solved within that reindeer herding district. So in a way, they through Sámi collaboration, they solved a problem that the Norwegian authorities really didn't want to solve at all. It went all the way to Supreme Court, the issue, and her brother lost there. So, and that's also the part of the reason for this specific piece of art, that it has that supreme to it. So it's Pilo Sápmi, and like you say, the references to the bison hunt and the way they were piled up. But Pilo Sápmi supreme, then as a comment to the decision by the Supreme Court of Norway. But also, of course, it is an ironic comment to that. And every skull has that bullet hole in there. So of course, telling us then that the reindeer are being shot down, even though that's not what happened. That's not the way they reduce the herds. But the original work was also with reindeer heads that she had placed outside the local court when the court case was decided in the lower court system in Norway, and then it was just pile of Sápmi. So this is in a way the advanced and developed part of that artwork. And I like that idea by Maret too, that her artwork in a way is always moving. So it's this is of course a specific piece that it's bought by the National Museum of Norway, and it will be right in the lobby. So every visitor coming into the new National Museum of Norway, this is the first piece of art they will see, which of course also is a nice comment to Sámi being the indigenous people and of Norway. So the first people in that sense, and the first thing you see when you enter the museum is a Sámi artwork. So there, and you can say irony is on Sámi's side in this case, but Maret is very clever at letting her art in a way develop and have different voices in it. So, but she is also a multi or cross-disciplinary artist. So she's also a writer and a very great speaker. I remember when this specific piece of art was presented in her home community, Gaudegale, when it was being on its way to the National Museum. So it had a last visit in her home community. Then we had a conversation there, and she was speaking of the way this artwork also reflects the hardships of young Sámi, and how this green colonialism affects the young Sámi population, and in a way steals away their belief in the future, because they are facing so many problems. So psychologically, it actually also affects the Sámi young people's well-being. And she spoke really wonderfully about that. So the whole audience was moved by her speech and the way she explained this, the hardships that because the Western society wants to be able to continue their way of life more or less in the same way as they've done it before. So now they need new resources that, ironically enough, are placed in the land of the Sámi, a lot of them, like we see in the rest of the world, that the most valuable minerals are on native grounds, which then probably again shows us that it was the land bringing in the indigenous peoples to be caretakers of those regions and those lands. So, but now the rest of the world has realized that, and they are finding the new resources on our land. So again, we get our political rights accepted, but on the other hand, we're still losing our land, and it's all about the land. So without the land, there is no way for indigenous peoples to survive. So it is a struggle still going on.
I certainly agree, and I think that Nina would certainly agree. Thank you very much, Harald. It's just been an absolute pleasure to meet you online. So someday we'll meet each other and share a meal. And you've given us so much, expanded our knowledge about our brothers and sisters from the Sápmi area. And it's been just a pleasure for us to have you as our special guest. So before we leave, then there are some thank yous that it's necessary for me to do. And I want to thank you all, those in the audience, for joining us today for this Arctic Amazon Knowledge Exchange Workshop on Land Relations, which is hosted by the Wapatah Center for Indigenous Visual Knowledge. in partnership with the OCAD University, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and the Power Plant Gallery of Contemporary Art. We'd also, I would certainly, or Nina and I perhaps, should also thank those behind the scenes, our Wapatah Center staff, as well as some of the folks from the IT department of OCAD University for helping us and making everything appear to be go smoothly today. So if you'd like to know more of the events associated with the Arctic Amazon project, please go to our website, wapatah.com, wapatah.com, or follow us on Instagram at wapatah.ocadu for more information about the events of this fall, this coming fall, or if you're in Brazil, in the Amazon, it's this spring for them. But let me just give you a sample of some of the names that we will be bringing to the exhibition this fall. Harald mentioned some of them, but here are a number of others. Sharon Noe Hakehiwe from Ecuador, Cousine Van Wevelen from Nunavut, Emerson Uwaira from Brazil, Sonia Kelleher-Combs from Alaska, Olinda Silvano from Peru, Maret and Ann-Sara from Norway, Outi Pieski from Finland, the late Pia Arki from Greenland, and Tanya Lukin-Linklater, Canadian, but by way of the Alaska, and many others. So we look forward to seeing you the next time. Our next conversation will be with the great Tanya Lukin-Linklater. So stay tuned. We will send out information both through the power plant, through Wapatah, and other social media sites. So thank you for attending this workshop. Have a good day. Good night.